Okay, so in the previous video, we factored a trinomial ax squared plus bx plus c by the AC method, using grouping by the AC method. Notice that the problems that we did, the GCF was 1. After we review this example, we're going to do problems, we're going to work on problems where the GCF is not 1. But yeah, it is the same as before. It's not going to be difficult. But let's just go ahead and review this one using the AC method. And remember, the whole idea with the AC method is to rewrite the middle term using 2 terms, so that way you'll have 4 terms altogether. So we'll have something like 4x squared, and then we'll have 2 terms here, and then your last term will be a negative 21. All right, so the idea with the AC method is to find these 2 terms, so that way you can group the first 2 and then group the last 2, and then we'll go from there. Okay? All right, so remember the AC method. Remember, we want to find 2 numbers whose product is AC. So remember, A is a coefficient of x squared, so that's 4 here. So it'll be 4 times, and then C is your constant, and your constant here is negative 21. And so if you need to use a calculator may be helpful with you to determine factors of numbers, to help you determine factors of these numbers as we go through this. But 4 times negative 21 is a negative 84. So we want to find 2 numbers whose product is negative 84 and whose sum is B. So the coefficient of the middle term. So the coefficient of the middle term is negative 8. Now you got to be careful with your signs. Some people will say the coefficient is 8, but in fact it's a negative 8. So you really need to be careful. So remember, we want the sum to be B, and in this example, the sum needs to be negative 8. All right, and so basically all you're going to do is just come up with some numbers, 2 numbers whose product is negative 84 and whose sum is negative 8. Now remember, as you go through these factors, remember, I want a product of that's negative. So one has to be positive, the other one has to be negative. I also want the sum to be negative 8. So the absolute value of these 2 numbers I choose is one that's going to be negative. All right. So the absolute value, the largest absolute value of these 2 numbers that I choose will be the one that's going to be negative. For example, if I, let's say, choose 4 and 21. All right, 4 times 21 is 84, but I want a negative 84. And just be strategic. Remember, you want the sum to be negative. In order for the sum to be negative, the larger absolute value of these 2 numbers here has to be negative. So the absolute value of 21 is larger than the absolute value of 4, so this is going to be the one that's going to be negative. And when I add them up, I do get a negative. I do get a negative sum, but it's not the one I want, because 4 times a negative 21 is a negative 17, and I need a negative 8. Okay, so just be strategic as you go through this. Then let's look at, again, just think of factors of 84. If you need to do a factor tree like we did before, then go ahead and do that. So let's say we want to choose 12 and 7. All right, now remember, 12 times 7 is a positive 84, but I want a negative. So let's think about which one of these is going to be negative, because remember, you want the sum to be negative. In order to get the sum to be negative, 12 has to be negative. And the product is negative 84, so if you use your calculator, 12 negative times 7, you do get negative 84. All right, but when I add them up, though, when I add these up, I get a negative 5, but I need a negative 8. So you just keep on trying until you find the one that works. All right, so let's try 6 and negative 14. So 6 times negative 14, when I do this, is going to be negative 84, and the sum will be a negative 8. Okay, So that's the one I'm going to need because I do want the sum to be negative 8. So these two are the numbers I'm going to use. So what that means is that I'm going to replace negative 8x using these two terms. So in other words, it'll look like this. And it really doesn't matter whether I put 6x here or whether I put negative 14x here. It does not matter. So I'm going to get plus 6x because this is a positive 6, and then minus 14x because this is a negative 14. And check yourself as you go along. Positive 6x and a negative 14x does give me a negative 8x. Okay? All right, now let's go ahead and see if what we have is going to work for us. The GCF of the first group is 2x, so you factor out a 2x. And then when I factor out a 2x, I get 2x times 2x is 4x squared, plus 2x times 3 is 6x. Now remember, as we talked about this before, my middle sign's negative, so I'm going to factor out a negative GCF. So the GCF of these two terms will be 7. So I'm going to factor out a negative 7. And so negative 7 times 2x is a negative 14x. And then a negative 7 times a positive 3. Negative 7 is positive 3 is a negative 21. And always check yourself. You really want these two factors, the one that's in parentheses, to be the same. So then you factor it out. So I get 2x plus 3. And when I factor out the 2x plus 3, from here I'm left with 2x. Don't forget parentheses. And then when I factor out the 2x plus 3 here, I'm left with a negative 7. All right, so that's the answer. So 2x plus 3 times 2x minus 7. Now don't forget, you really should check yourself as you go through this very quickly in your mind. You should be able to do this. 2x times 2x is 4x squared. That's what I wanted. A positive 3 times a negative 7 is a negative 21. That's what I wanted. The outer is a negative 14x. The inner is a positive 6x. And when I add them up, I do get a negative 8x, which is what I wanted. So what I have boxed off is a correct answer. Okay, now let's look at this example, number 2. Suppose I want to factor 16y squared minus 34y plus 18. All right, so 16y squared minus 34y plus 18. Now remember, as we go through factoring, you always want to look to see if this polynomial has a GCF other than 1. In this case, it does. The GCF here is 2. GCF is 2. So you want to factor out the 2 first before you go any further with this idea. So we get 2 times 8y squared minus 17y plus 9. So 2 times 8y squared is 16y squared. Check yourself. Use the distributive method. 2 times negative 17y is negative 34y. And then 2 times a positive 9 is 18. All right, now we're going to use grouping using the AC method with this trinomial. So I'm going to bring that to the side to do the work here. So I get 8y squared minus 17y plus 9. All right, so remember, this is your A, this is your B, and this is your C. All right, so I want the product. Remember, you want the product to be AC. In this case, that's 8 times 9, which is 72. And I need the sum to be B. I need the sum to be B, and B in this case is a negative 17. All right, so let's think of some numbers whose product is positive 72. Now remember, just like we talked about here, be strategic. I need this product to be a positive 72. Remember, in order to get a positive product, both of these numbers have to have the same sign. So either they're both negative or they're both positive. Well, if I want the sum to be negative, then these two numbers have to both be negative, because a negative plus another negative number will give us a negative number. All right, so let's go ahead and think about this. For example, if I choose, let's say, negative 8 and negative 9. Negative 8 times negative 9 is a positive 72, and when I look at the sum, look at the sum, I do get negative 17. So right off the bat, I came up with the correct two numbers that work. All right, now be careful. 8 and 9, I do agree. 8 and 9 is 72, but the sum is a positive 17. But I wanted a negative. So whenever you get this idea where the sum you get and the sum you want are just opposites, just change the signs. Just change the signs of these two factors. Okay, so here we go. So then we're going to have right here, I'm going to do the work here. So then I need to rewrite this middle term. Remember this middle term using these two numbers. Again, it does not matter whether you put 8 first or 9 first. Okay, so we got to get 8y squared plus 8x. Oops, sorry, that's 8y, excuse me. 8y. Now don't forget, don't just say plus 8. It's got to contain that middle variable here. It's got to contain the variable y. So 8y, oops, sorry, it's negative 8y, excuse me. Negative 8y minus 9y plus 9. Okay, so remember using this. All right, so let's group the first two, group the last two. From the first group, I can factor out an 8y. When I do that, I'm left with 8y times y is 8y squared minus 8y times 1, a negative 1. Negative 8y times a negative 1 is a negative 8y. From the second group, I can factor out a negative 9. So negative 9 times y is a negative 9y. A negative 9 times a negative 1, because negative times a negative is a positive. A negative 9 times a negative 1 is a positive 9. And we're on the right track because these two factors here in these two groups is the same. So we just factor it out. And so I get y minus 1 times 8y minus 9. Now remember, be careful, that is not the answer. Don't put that don't put that as your answer, because that is a factorization for this. So if this was your polynomial, then this would be your answer. Remember, that was not the polynomial. The polynomial was this. All right, so all you got to do is don't forget about the GCF. So your answer is going to be the GCF of the original polynomial times these two binomials. So your answer is going to be 2 times y minus 1 times 8y minus 9. And so that's your answer. Okay? All right, let's look at another example. Okay, so number 3. All right, suppose I had 28 cubed plus 37a squared plus 8a. All right, so 28 cubed plus 37a squared plus 8a. All right, so again, always look for GCF. What do these three terms have in common other than 1? And remember, you want to use the greatest common factor. Well, it looks like in terms of the greatest common factor, it looks like the greatest common factor here is a. So the GCF is a. So I'm going to factor out an a from here. And we get a times 20a squared plus 37a plus 8. All right, so 20a squared plus 37a plus 8. All right, so remember we're gonna factor by grouping this trinomial. So I'm going to rewrite it over here so I don't do all the work here. Just put it here. So I'm going to get 20a squared. I'm just going to rewrite it. Plus 37a plus 8. Remember, this is your a, this is your b, and this is your c. So I need the product to be AC, which in this case is 20 times 8. 20 times 8, which is 160. And I need the sum to be B, which in this case is a positive 37. Positive 37. All right, now this number is not that small, so it's going to take us possibly a little longer to find the two numbers that work. But just look for different factors of 160. So for example, some of you may say, well, what about 8 times 20? Now again, be strategic, just like we did before. The product is positive, so that means that these two numbers have to have the same sign. Well, if I want the sum to be a positive 37, a positive number, then that means these two numbers have to be both positive. All right, so don't make them negative, because a negative is not going to help you, because a negative plus another negative number is going to be a negative number. You want positive. Okay, so 8 times 20 is 160, but the sum does not help us. The sum here is a 28, and I need a 37. So again, just use your calculator. Use your calculator to come up with different factors of 160. So for example, 4. Let's try 4. 4 times, so you're going to say 160 divided by 4. If you can't figure it out, just say 160 divided by 4 is 40. But right off the bat, you know that's not going to work because the sum here is 44, and I need a 37. So just keep trying, keep trying. Let's say 20. Oh, we already did 20. Let's say, well, the last digit is 0, so I know 5 will go into it. So let's try 5. Let's see if that's going to work. So 160, if you don't know right away, just say 160 divided by 5. You get, 160 divided by 5, you get 32. Okay? Now look, I think that's going to work, because look, 5 times 32 is 180, and then 5 plus 32 is 37. And that's what I needed. So that's the two numbers I'm going to use. Okay, so again, it may have taken you a few more, but just keep trying different factors of 160. Use your calculator to do that until you find something that works. Okay, so we're going to rewrite the middle term. We're going to write the middle term using these two numbers. So I'm going to get 20a squared. Again, it does not matter whether you put the 5 or the 32 first. Plus 5a plus 32a plus 8. Okay? So all we did was just rewrote the middle term using these two numbers. Group the first two, group the last two. From the first group, I can factor out a 5a. And remember, 5a times 4a is 20a squared, plus 5a times 1 is a positive 5a. From the second group, I'm going to factor out a positive, remember your middle sign here is positive, positive 8. And I'm left with, that's positive 8. 8 times 4a is 32a, plus 8 times 1 is a positive 8. And as you always check yourself, you want these two to be the same. So I'm going to factor out this 4a plus 1, as I get 4a plus 1, in parentheses, times 5a plus 8. So I ended up with these two binomials, the product of these two binomials. Now remember, again, that's not the answer to the original problem. That's the answer if I asked you just to factor this. But we needed to factor this. So remember, we pulled out the GCF-A, so that's got to be in the answer. So the answer then will be a times these two binomials, 4a plus 1 times 5a plus 8. All right. Okay, let's look at one more example. Let's suppose you wanted to factor 5x squared plus 50xy plus 125y squared. Now you may say, well, a is 5, c is 125. I multiply, I'm going to get a big number. But you remember, you got to look for the GCF first. So the GCF here is 5. So factor out of 5. So I get 5 times x squared plus 10xy. Remember, 5 times 10xy is 50xy plus 25y squared, because 5 times 25y squared is 125y squared. So I'm going to use the factoring by grouping on this. So I'm going to rewrite it here. X squared plus 10xy plus 25y squared. And so I need the product to be AC. Remember, A here is 1, C is 25, so I get 25. I need the sum to be B. I need the sum to be B. In this case, the sum needs to be 10. And it's very obvious which one's going to work if you think about it. 5 times 5, right? So 5 and 5 is 25. 5 times 5 is 25. And the sum, 5 plus 5, is 10. So I'm going to read the middle term using these two numbers. All right, so I'm going to get x squared plus, now be careful, this is xy, so you got to say 5xy plus another 5xy. Check yourself, 5xy plus 5xy is 10xy. So remember, we're going to rewrite this middle term as these two terms, and then finally 25x, oops, that's a y, 25y squared. So I wrote it small because I'm running into this. Group the first two, group the last two. From the first two, it looks like I can factor out only an x, and I'm left with x plus 5y. See that? X times x is x squared. X times 5y is 5xy. And from the second group, I can factor out a positive, looks like a 5y, positive 5y. And so 5y times x, 5y times x is 5xy, plus 5y times y, oops, 5y. 5y times 5y, because 5y times 5y is 25y squared. And again, if you look at this, these two are the same factors, so factor it out. I get x plus 5y times, and remember, if you factor out the x plus 5y, I'm left with x plus, and if you factor out the x plus 5y, you're left with 5y. So notice that these two binomials are the same. But remember, that's not the answer because you originally took out a 5. So your GCF is 5, so that's got to be part of your answer. So I'm going to get 5 times, bring down the GCF, times x plus 5y times x plus 5y. Or if you want to, since these two factors are the same, you can write it as, or you can write it as 5 times x plus 5y to the second power. And so either one of those is your answer. Okay, so that is the end of that section. So you should have enough information now to be able to factor by grouping using the AC method when either the leading coefficient, when the GCF is 1 or when the GCF is not 1. Okay?